good afternoon to everyone. My name is Ted Steinkamp. I am one of the sales team members here at Advanta IRA. And we're going to be doing a little bit of a presentation here about maximizing retirement income using double net and triple net leases. This is the first time we've actually done this subject matter. We are looking forward to having a presentation. We're going to have a gentleman today by the name of Andrew Ziffer with Greenleaf Management. He'll be talking about the subject matter. But for the moment right now, what we'd like to do is simply just do a quick review of what we do here at Advanta IRA. And for those of you who are interested, my background, 35 years in the financial services industry, and contact information is below in the event you do wish to reach out to me with any questions following today's presentation. But just a couple of things real quick about Advanta IRA. We've been around 23 years as a company, very broad depth and breadth as far as individuals that work here with their accreditations and professional backgrounds. We custody over $3 billion in client assets, and that's spread out over about 13,000 accounts. And one of the things we do pride ourselves with our service model, we keep it personal. We want to have people involved in the process. We like leveraging technology wherever possible, but we don't purely rely on it. When you have an important question, you can speak with your dedicated account manager and have it answered in a prompt manner. One question that's often asked is really, why self-directed retirement accounts? Well, there's a lot of advantages to them. First of all, it allows you to invest in things that you know. You can do things outside of the stock market. And just as a quick note, you can invest in pretty much anything other than just life insurance, with the exception of life insurance contracts and collectibles. So the creativity you can exercise is basically unlimited. It just needs to comply with the IRS rules. But it also gets you out and away from stock market uncertainty, which is what a lot of self-directed investors seek. And just really, why do people really want to pursue self-direction? First of all, it's a very important source of investment capital, both for individuals and in the financial services industry. As an individual, it's capital that you may not have thought about using before for other investments. You also don't have to tap your personal cash holdings or savings. You may have other things that you have to keep that in reserve, such as an emergency fund. Maybe tuition is coming up if you have children in school. Very important source, but you can certainly use it for investment. You also may just be tired of the stock market. The ups and downs causes a little too much anxiety in your life. But really, one of the things I do want to focus on is the tax benefits. There's the old adage in the industry, it's not what you earn, it's what you keep. And when you don't have to pay taxes because you can defer them or perhaps tax-free in the event of a Roth account, that is a huge benefit. Account balances grow very rapidly. And just really, why is this not that well known? Just to give you a little point, about 4% of all IRAs are self-directed. That's how little used this is, but also how impactful. And the IRS rules, as I said, they allow for a very broad range of investments, and not every custodian is going to allow you to hold alternative investments or a self-directed account. It's just simply not their business model. And one of the things I do like about this particular slide is, we referenced the popular fast food restaurant chain McDonald's. Their business model is selling burgers. You don't go there and ask, hey, where's the local pizza place? They're probably not going to tell you because simply they're in the business of selling burgers. They want you to buy their products. So if you go to where your current accounts are held, whether they be at a brokerage firm, bank, insurance company, they're focused on their products. That's what they wish to sell. They don't really want to go outside of it. And that's where self-direction has a huge benefit for you. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is a huge pool of assets, and that's why retirement accounts are a very good capital source. Right now, the way the numbers stand, there's over $37.5 trillion in retirement funds in the United States. Most investors that invest their retirement funds are not taking a short-term view. They're actually wanting to look out 5 to 10 years into the future. And that's where these sources are very good for the right investments. And if you're looking for alternatives to your traditional investment forms, IRAs are a great place. And also too, it allows you to just wash, rinse, and repeat. You can be an existing investor, you can reinvest over time, you can invest one time, but you do have the flexibility to make the decisions. It's your money. And when we talk about self-directed plans, basically any account that has the letters IRA after it, you can use for self-direction. And also, just as a note, if you look in the lower right-hand corner of this slide, health savings accounts can be self-directed, so can education savings accounts and 401k plans. We do offer a solo 401k plan service. And as a side note, for those with pension plans, those can be self-directed as well. We do record keep those investments for pension plans. Moving monies in and out of self-directed accounts, fairly simple. It's just a transfer process. You can always transfer between IRAs without any sort of tax consequences and no penalties. This is done commonly. It's done every day. And for those of you that are that have old 401ks that want to do a rollover, same thing can happen. It is a tax-free transfer without any penalty. The only difference being when you submit the paperwork, when you're doing it with an IRA, you submit the paperwork to the custodian who will be bringing over the money into your IRA account. But when you're doing it with a former employer's retirement plan, you're going to have to utilize their paperwork and initiate what's called a direct rollover. So you're going to provide the instructions of where you want that check sent. Typically, all this can get taken care of inside of approximately 2 weeks. Some instances it takes a little bit longer, but that just depends upon the administrator's back office processes. At Advanta IRA, we don't have control over that. We typically get the accounts open in one day and we'll initiate the process where we are involved. And then really just kind of getting down to a couple of things. There's really two types of investors involved in this, both active and passive. The active investors we just simply define as people who like to roll up the sleeves and be involved in the assets. And that's whether you're owning rental real estate, you're rehabbing houses, perhaps wholesaling, and you want to have direct control and get your hands dirty in the process. But then there's people like myself. I'm done with that at this point in my life. I'd rather be passive. And that involves me outsourcing the hands-on work to someone who is very competent. And that's what you really focus on as a passive investor, whether it be private placements, syndications, private lending. You're turning those day-to-day responsibilities over to a competent party, and they will execute on that. And that kind of leads me in here to our guest presenter for today, Andrew Ziffer. Just a couple of bullet points about Andrew. I'm not going to go into much depth here. Andrew does a much better job talking about himself and explaining his background than what I could do. So really what I'd like to do at this point, Andrew, if you're okay with it, I'm going to turn the screen over to you.
So just very briefly, Ted, I am a big fan of IRA investing. I had a long corporate career in technology and then shifted to real estate in 2023. And to this day, my 401k from my W-2 days and my corporate days, I rolled that into an IRA, and then some of that IRA sits at Fidelity, and other parts of the IRA sit in a self-directed IRA, and I invest in real estate. And so that's what I do. And honestly, I deal with lots of people who do that every day. So it's in my area and in my area of influence, whenever someone discovers that they can actually invest in an IRA or invest in real estate through an IRA, they get very excited, and we have a lot of people doing that. So it's a very common thing, and it's a very exciting process to do, especially for the kind of investing I do, which I'm going to talk about a little bit now. But I'm a partner at Greenleaf Capital, and Greenleaf Capital, we have multiple things we do. We've bought and sold about 750 million of real estate over the past since 2008. Most of it in the past 10 years. And so we own and manage apartments, mobile homes, office, medical office, flex, which is it's industrial in the back, office in the front, and retail. And I run the retail business, which specializes in double net and triple net leases. And so what is a double net or triple net lease? As you can see on the front page, these are double net. Actually, everything on here is a triple net lease except for the Dollar Generals, which are usually double net leases, and some of them are triple net leases too. So this is the type of asset that usually qualifies as a net lease piece of real estate. Hopefully I don't sit here and bore everybody for the next 45 minutes. I want to provide some valuable information. So please pop your questions in the chat, and we'll get to your questions either during the presentation or after it. So what is a double net lease? Well, you know, telling you what a double net lease is it might help to actually tell you about why I'm actually here. So I said I had a corporate career for a long time. In 2003, I left the corporate world, and then I did something crazy. I went to my wife and said, "Hey, Janet, what do you think about me quitting my high-paying IT job and going to buy an apartment complex?" And her response was, "Okay, sure." And so I did that, and I bought an apartment complex in Marietta, Georgia. I went from a sterile environment in a cubicle, making a lot of money, to running a low to middle income apartment complex where you had to get people to pay rent, you had to kick drug dealers out, and you had to do everything on a shoestring budget. I showed up to work in shorts and a t-shirt every day. I detrashed apartments, I fixed plumbing, I cleaned up parking lots, and I did the thing. So in 2003, 20 years ago, I was cleaning up trash from my apartment parking lot. And so many years later, in 2017, I finally I had 2 apartment complexes at that point. I sold them in 2017 for a pretty good profit. And I said, "Oh my God, what do I do now?" And so what I did is I bought an Applebee's and a Zaxby's, and those were essentially my paycheck. Now what happened is I had a job. So from 2003 to 2017, I had a job. I was running an apartment complex. I was doing accounting. I was doing management. I was managing a team of an office leasing person, a maintenance staff, and it was a job. The Zaxby's and the Applebee's I bought were triple net leases, and I basically had nothing to do. So the joke is I did laundry and went grocery shopping for a year. And then in 2018, my business partner, Josh, said, "Hey, I want you to come to Greenleaf, and I want you to do what you did, but I want you to do it on a much larger scale at Greenleaf, and I want you to start a retail business at Greenleaf." And here we are 6 years later, and we were about a couple dozen transactions into buying and selling triple net leases, and we've done pretty well with a good return on investment. So a triple net lease, I'll start from the bottom first, but a triple net lease property like an Applebee's, essentially the landlord is responsible for very little. They're responsible for, number one, making sure the tenant is complying with the lease, which usually just makes sure they're paying the insurance, all the insurance on the property, they're paying the property taxes, and they're performing all the maintenance. So for our triple net properties, we send an inspector out there once a year. We make sure they're paying their taxes, and we get a copy of their insurance. And that is the only thing we do. It's very minimal. And honestly, it is, when we talk about headcount at Greenleaf, on a per property basis, triple net properties have the lowest headcount per property of any property type we have right now, because apartments have staff, office is a little bit heavier maintenance when we have to actually fix air conditioners and change out tenants. It's a little bit more work. For a triple net lease, typically like for a Zaxby's, you have one tenant and that's it. And so that's the easiest one. A little bit different is a double net lease. Triple net means it's a net, which means the tenant is responsible for taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Double net can change. And usually it means the tenants are responsible for paying the property taxes and insurance. And then there's various amounts of maintenance and other divisions of interior maintenance. Like for example, on a Dollar General, the Dollar General could be a triple net lease, but if it's a double net lease, more than commonly, the landlord is responsible for fixing the roof, the parking lot, and any maybe plumbing to the building. And then the tenant is responsible for replacing and fixing anything inside, which could include painting, bathrooms, or anything that happens within the structure. But if there's a roof leak, we're getting a call or we're getting an email from Dollar General saying, hey, go fix that roof leak. And we say, okay, fine, that's our responsibility. And so with a double net lease, it's always important to read the lease and understand what the tenant responsibility is and the landlord responsibility. It still is very light work. I mean, honestly, we don't get a call every month about a roof leak. We get a call maybe once a year about a roof leak, and that's about it. So it's still a lot less maintenance than a full service lease in an office building or an apartment building. So why do you invest in a triple net lease? Well, you know, honestly, I'm in my 50s right now. I like stable income. I want that monthly or quarterly check on a very reliable basis. I want my investments to be predictable and understandable. And I don't want to have to show up every day in an apartment office or an office and actually manage the task of collecting rent. The triple net leases have prescribed rent. You literally know per the lease what your rent's going to be. It could be, you could have a rent schedule in your lease, including options, probably for 20, 30, 40 years sometimes. So you know what your income is. If it's a triple net lease, you know your expenses because your expenses are very minimal. And most important too, there is no job. It is very easy to buy triple net leases if you know what you're doing and you have the wherewithal to manage the property, make sure the tenant's doing what they're supposed to be doing, understanding the insurance requirements and lease requirements. Double net leases are a little bit more complicated, but still manageable. And honestly, risk mitigation is a big, big issue. So these are not high risk, highly volatile assets. These are stable, producing assets that have a reliable cash flow. Your tenant is not someone who has a job at a local retail store paying your rent. Your tenant is a corporate tenant who could be publicly traded, could be from a high net worth company such as, for example, Zaxby's is owned by Goldman Sachs. And so your tenant could be Zaxby's, it could be a franchisee who owns one Zaxby's, or it could be a corporate client who owns 20 Zaxby's, or it could be somebody who owns 100. So your tenant is going to be a much higher grade tenant and a higher net worth tenant, which means your rent collection is going to be much more reliable and much easier to collect and manage. As you could kind of guess, for a cap rate, in case anyone hasn't seen a cap rate before, a cap rate is essentially what the interest rate would be on your deal if you purchased it cash only. For example, when you put $100,000 in a bank and you get a 5% rate on your money market account or your CD, essentially that 5% interest could also be called a cap rate when it comes to real estate. So if you were to buy a piece of real estate for $1 million cash and you're buying it at a 5% cap, you're essentially making that 5% a year on it. With triple net leases typically trade at a little bit lower cap rate. They pay a little bit less than double net leases, and double net leases pay slightly higher, but it also depends on the asset. So for example, we're buying some retail locations right now at 8.8, at an 8.8 cap. And then last year we were buying some triple net leases at 7.5 cap. So that it all changes. And just like any real estate investment is cyclical. So you have an up cycle and a down cycle. And right now our belief is that with interest rates high, we are in probably the bottom of a buyer's market, which means now is the time to buy because prices are low. And as soon as interest rates start to go up, property values will also go up. Banks love to finance triple net and double net leases because their tenant is very reliable and it's very predictable. And so bank financing for typically these assets are very easy for professional investors. And of course, the return on investment, I pointed to that before, but your cash flow is super predictable. And so it's a lot easier to know what you're going to make on a triple net investment, maybe versus an apartment complex or a 5-story office building with 50 tenants. So what are the concerns about buying a triple net leased property? And it's a typical response or typical risk of any real estate transaction. You always have the risk of a tenant default. There is always the chance that for example, a Burger King operator could be overextended and have maybe 20 units and declare bankruptcy for their 20 units. And so then you have to deal with that. It's very rare, but it does happen. When you're talking about restaurants, like for example, Carvel has had some ups and downs over the years, but Carvel is not a brand a lot of people know. But when consumer behavior changes towards a brand, that could actually affect the brand economics. And does that brand make enough money to pay rent at that location? And lease term. Leases are always negotiable, and properties are always valued by their lease term. The longer the lease, the higher the property value is, and the shorter the lease, the lower the property value is. So ideally, you want a long-term lease that has prescribed rent escalations. The best escalations are yearly escalations. So we have some properties that the rent goes up 3% a year, and those are great investments. And it's also kind of our preference to see those yearly bumps. Sometimes the bumps could be every 5 years, or sometimes it could be a flat lease for 10 years, just depending on the lease. But a lease with yearly bumps and yearly rent increases is going to be worth a lot more than a lease with a bump every 10 years. And then, of course, there's always the local authority and a municipality risk of has zoning changed. Some of them could be good risk where the property around your gas station has dramatically increased and they want to tear down a gas station and build something bigger and better. And so in that case, it would actually work to your advantage. And so the regulatory risk could be good or bad, and it also depends on what's happening around your location. So how is a property valued? Property is valued by cap rate. So if you're buying $1 million property that generates $50,000 a year, that's a 5 cap, and that's going to be how the property is valued. But maybe the market is saying that for that $1 million investment, those are selling at 8 caps instead of 6 caps. And so then, would you want to buy a 5 cap property or an 8 cap property? I would always want to buy an 8 cap property. And one thing that's also very important is a lot of retail leases are priced based on the economics of the tenant. So if the tenant, we have this situation where the tenant is killing it. They're making $3-4 million a year in gross sales, and their rent could be very minimal or it could be a lot. And so you always want their sales to be in line with their rent. Ideally a certain percentage of their rent, which we target about 8%. But if they're making $5 million a year, and for example, their rent is $100,000 a year, they completely don't care about rent. And honestly, they would just be there forever because they're never ever going to be able to find a place for $100,000 rent. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but when you're buying a retail location, you always want the rent to be super low. And when the rent is super low, it avoids the risk of them relocating. And how is a profit made? Properties are priced based on cap rate and also market conditions. So when properties are in a good real estate market, cap rates go down, prices go up. And for example, when we're not in a great environment, when interest rates are high, cap rates go up and prices go down. But what also happens, assuming a very simple market that stays steady, if cap rates are staying steady and you get a 10% increase in rent in year 5, that also changes the value of your property, increases the value of your property. So more rent equals a more valuable property. And so one of the businesses we like talking about are Dollar Generals. Dollar General is an amazing business. It's a publicly traded company. And this is just we're giving a little bit of a case study of a tenant we talk about a lot. They have literally, I think they're up to 19,000 plus stores. They try to build about 1,000 stores a year right now. They're a growth-oriented business. Last time I checked, they have about $400 million of cash on hand in their bank account. So they could withstand they're pretty resilient as far as withstanding any economic downturn. They have all sorts of different lease structures. With 19,000 leases, they have double net leases, triple net leases. Prices are all over the board. I've seen Dollar Generals for as low as $250,000, and I've seen them as high as $3 million. The prices are all over the board. And Dollar General is about as good a credit as you can get for a retail tenant. It's publicly traded, it's rated by Moody's, and it just doesn't get better than that. If Dollar General has problems, more than likely market forces around it are causing the problems, and it's not necessarily Dollar General itself. So just to kind of tell you, just to be a little honest with you, most of my real estate assets right now are in triple net leases. So I personally have interest in assets such as Panera, Dollar General, Applebee's. We had an IHOP, and those are the things I invest in, and those are the things that are my retirement paycheck right now. And some of them are double net leases, some of them are triple net leases. We like the triple net leases a little bit more, but the double net leases are also pretty nice too. As I said before, we love our Dollar Generals. And when you're looking for something that requires very little management, you're looking for predictable income, and you're looking for something more passive than active, triple net leases are the way to go. So to give you a little bit of a case study, of course, my favorite topic, we'll keep on talking about our Dollar Generals. And we are syndicators, so we actually help people invest their IRA money into assets such as this. And so this is an example of what an investment may look like, just in general in an IRA. But for example, we would have a Dollar General. Those are pictures of three of some recent ones we're looking at. But typically, you're going to have a location. You'll have a year built, and typically, what happens the longer it has been built, the better the cap rate is, because it's probably at the end of its lease term. And when it's at the end of its lease term, it's going to probably be worth a little bit less until you get the renewal. And as soon as you get the renewal, then the lease value and the property value goes up. And typically there's a base term. So in this example, this was a 20-year lease from July 2010 to June 30th, 2030. So it's a 20-year lease. And on that 20-year lease, there's 3 5-year options. And so Dollar General, as well as the landlord, know their rent for this property for 35 years. So that's what I was talking about as far as predictable income. You know what your rent's going to be. And every 5 years, you get a 10% rent bump. So ideally, what you want to do is you want to get that 10% rent bump and sell the property with a 5-year lease to somebody else. You hold it for 5 years, you get the renewal, you get the 10% rent bump, and then you sell it to somebody else. And so as a quick example of what something might look like, for example, a Dollar General might cost about $1 million, costs about $80,000 to close. You would get a 60%, 66, anywhere from a 60 to 65% loan on it. And then on the right-hand side, the deal may look something like this, where we call it beer money at a Greenleaf, and beer money is the money that actually goes in your pocket every quarter. So the beer money, the cash-on-cash return, is going to be about 8.1% in your pocket. But what also happens when you're investing in these properties, you're paying off debt. And so when you're paying off debt, what also happens is you have principal payments that are also added to returns. And so essentially about, in this particular example, 2.6% is an additional 2.6% return to bring it up to 10.7% in year one. And so your total return in year one is approximately 11%. And then in year 5, as rent goes up, your cash on cash return, your beer money, will go up to 10.7%, which is on the far right side, bottom right. And then your total investment returns go to 14%. And that assumes you don't sell it and you just keep it. And we talked about this a little bit before. Dollar General is it's a great tenant to have. It's probably one of the when you have 19,000 units, there's a lot of people who have a vested interest in figuring out how to buy the best Dollar Generals there are. It's got a great reputation. It's when economic times are good, Dollar General works, and when economic times are bad, Dollar General works even better. Primarily, they're in rural locations. We've seen locations that have 500 people or less in a 1 mile range. And it's fascinating to see these Dollar Generals in the middle of nowhere. And of course, it is a publicly traded company with a real Moody's rating. And this is just an example of what a Dollar General or any property, honestly, not just Dollar General, might look like. And if you look at the gross income slide on the top of this profit and loss statement, you'll see that this has a gross income that goes up a little bit every year. It looks like about 3% every year. So the rent every year is going up on this property. And expenses for a triple net property or a double net property typically are very low. You're paying for some sort of software management, QuickBooks or Yardi or something to that effect. And then you're paying to, honestly, the two big expenses we have every year are an inspection, which could cost about $1,000 to $1,500 a year, and the tax return. And the tax return could cost $1,500 to $2,000 a year for a simple property. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, the beer money, the cash on cash return, you can see how that goes up every year when you have rent bumps. So every year, as long as you have those yearly rent bumps, you get a nice return in your pocket. And this is what an asset an asset purchase would look like from start to finish. So you would buy the asset with about, and that it's the same example. So we're buying $1 million asset. The $1 million asset's going to take about $430,000 to close. And so we outlay that $430,000 in year 0. And then in year 5, if you look at the third line, the net sales gain, that $430,000 turns into $800,000 over 5 years. And so this is a particularly great example of a property. I would love to buy this type of property every day. This doesn't happen every day, of course, but the investors or the property is actually earning about 21%. And if we sell it at our premium. So if you look at the column that says deal level IRR, that's the big number of the deal level internal rate of return, 20.7%. So what that effectively means is if you put $100,000 in this property in year 0, you would have effectively earned 20.7% every year for 5 years. And so that's why this kind of investment is exciting, because you could see you'll have the beer money every quarter, and then you'll have a bigger paycheck at the end of the deal too. So that's why this is exciting for me. And I think that is the end of my presentation. So Ted, I'm happy to answer any questions. Oh, and I got one freebie. We're giving away, whoever likes some swag, we have a Greenleaf little bottle we're giving away to the first 5 people who, Lisa, our marketing manager, is watching this conference. So if you put your email address in the chat box, Lisa will mail you a little Greenleaf water bottle as a gift to say thank you for Ted for having us. So Ted, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, appreciate that very much. Very informative, and getting a number of chats here, so we'll get that off to you. But Andrew, got a couple of questions that did come in during the presentation. And the first one that came in was from a gentleman named Steven. And his question is, just seeing the hurricane hit Asheville, can you protect these kind of leases sufficiently against natural disasters?
Well, that's a great question. And so that's all an insurance requirement. So we own a Dollar General in Sevierville, Tennessee, which is just outside of Pigeon Forge. So Dollywood, the Titanic exhibit, and all of the fun in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And we honestly didn't know if they were affected. So we got on the phone this morning, called them, and they said everything's fine, so that's great. But behind that type of natural disaster damage, there's always going to be an insurance policy. And so in this particular example, this asset we own in Sevierville, Tennessee, the tenant insures the property for property damage, liability, and anything. If that building were to be leveled, the tenant is carrying insurance on that to get it rebuilt. We do carry a small liability policy, a general liability policy on top of that, because honestly, if there's ever any type of slip and fall or some type of liability issue, even though Dollar General or whoever the tenant is might have caused the issue, attorneys will always list the property owner on the liability policy. And so that's why we always carry the additional general liability policy on top of whatever the tenant does.
Okay. And another question came in from a gentleman named Harry. His question is, why would one want to sell a property with a cap return of 14% at year 5 or 6?
I'm sorry, why would someone want to buy a property for a cap rate of 14%?
Why would you want to sell a property with a cap rate of 14% at year 5 or 6?
Well, that's a good question. So number one, I would say, as long as you have confidence in the longevity of the tenant in that space, I personally would not, because that would be a great paycheck for me, and I would be getting it quarterly. And the tenant, if the tenant's kicking butt there and their sales are great and their rent is low, I would see no reason to sell. Now, on the other hand, it could be, and this happened with a lot of apartment complexes over the years, that possibly you bought the apartment complex for $50,000 a unit and somebody's offering you $100,000 a unit. And when you bought the property for $50,000 a unit and sold it for $100,000 a unit, you didn't pay $50,000 a unit for that property, first of all, because you leveraged it. So you might have paid, if you got a 60 or 70% loan, you've paid $20,000. So of your $20,000 per unit investment, you just made $50,000, almost tripling your money. So in that particular example, you might want to just take your profits and invest them in something else. And so that would be the only case I would see where you'd want to actually sell a property that has that kind of cap return, because the appreciation on the property has been outstanding and the appreciation outweighs the return. But, you know, honestly, there's a lot of people we know who buy properties and never sell, and that's just their business model, and it works for them. We are, Greenleaf itself, we're syndicators, so we have about 2,000 investors on our list. And we buy deals with other investors. And a lot of times our job is to maximize our investors' investment, which also maximizes our investment too, because we co-invest with all of our investors. And so we're tasked with making business decisions versus just off the cuff decisions. If I like it, I want to keep it. So we're more responsible to and more accountable to making sure we're maximizing our assets.
Okay, got a couple more coming on in. So the next question, Andrew, is how do you determine whether to buy or pass on a deal? What formula do you typically use?
Well, that's a question that's going to take 20 years to answer. And so a lot of times I joke about when I'm speaking to a new investor, I tell them, look, you know, you're not paying for our expertise and all the great decisions we've made over the years. You're paying for all of our mistakes and all of the mistakes that we're never going to make again, and all of our experience. And so what really makes a good deal for us, number one, we want to make sure it produces a great return for our investors. We're buying it below market value, and we're able to provide a reliable return to our investors. And so if you look at, I give this example of a pyramid. So if there's a pyramid of 1,000 deals, we are going to find the top of the pyramid right here, and then just focus on those top deals on the top of the pyramid. We just went through an exercise. There were about we had this one particular tenant. There were about 600 or 700 properties for sale. We tried to find all the high cap rate, low price assets. And so of that 600, it narrowed it down to roughly 200. And then we said, okay, of those 200 who are at low prices, high cap rates, which ones have super cheap rent? And super cheap rents means, usually means longevity of that location, because rent is not a problem for that tenant to pay. And that might have narrowed it down from 600 to 200, and then it might have narrowed it down to about 50. And then we actually buy some additional data. We buy performance data from a third-party company that tells us maybe what kind of credit card transactions that location's having, what kind of foot traffic that location's have, and then it actually lines it up. So if there's, say, 1,000 tenants inside their system, we try to focus on the top 33rd percentile of those tenants to make sure we're buying the top performing tenants. And so that's just the criteria that we use internally. But of course, we're buying that data. We have access to various things that maybe a mom and pop operator may not have access to.
Okay, and a question that came in from Harry. As a landlord, do you get to tell the tenant what kind of minimum insurance coverages they must have? Is this legal?
It's actually even easier than that. The insurance requirements are always in the lease. And so back to that, one of the landlord's tasks is to ensure compliance with the lease. And one of the compliance items is the insurance. And so every year, every tenant will send us their insurance policy. They'll name Greenleaf or whatever the Greenleaf asset that owns the property as an additional insured. And then we just go through the insurance policy, compare it to the lease, and make sure they're complying with their lease. And so it's actually pretty easy. And if they're not complying with the lease, we say, hey, you're not complying with the lease. Please add these additional insurance items. And there's usually very little discussion. It's if they're not in full compliance, it is usually accidental versus intentional.
Okay, and Stephen came back with a second question. What is the typical minimum investment in a triple net lease?
Well, if you're doing it with a syndicator like Greenleaf, we have minimums of $25,000, and then so we have a lot of $25,000 and $50,000 investors, and then we have people who go up to $500,000 or $1 million. So if we're doing 1031s, we could get into the 500,000, million, million and a half. But if we're just talking about, like, for example, IRA investors are usually $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 at a time, but our minimum is $25,000.
Okay, and Ram has sent in a question. How can an investor work with Greenleaf and build a portfolio?
Ted, will everybody have access to my contact information or Lisa's contact information at the end of this? Or if
we can certainly get it out to them, but yes, they will.
Okay, so Lisa could type it in, and Lisa's our investment manager, and she's happy to take your information and add you to our distribution. And honestly, if you just want to be added to our distribution list, no commitment, just drop her your email address and we'll just add you to our communications, and you'll see about all the interesting things Greenleaf does, which honestly, we do a lot of cool things. We do a lot of work with nonprofits, and we have a nonprofit event every quarter, so you'll see about our Greenleaf camp in the summer. We did a volunteer event at a pet shelter earlier in the year. So we do a lot of fun stuff here too.
Yes, unfortunately, it doesn't look like I have access to the main chat as a co-presenter, but if you want to go ahead and email invest@greenleaf, MGMT as in management.com, we can go ahead and get you set up there. We'd love to add you to our communications. I'm Lisa in Investor Relations, and if you have any questions about triple net, double net, retail, or any other of our other classifications, you can always reach out to us as well.
Absolutely, I'll put that up in just a second. Let me ask you just this one question that came in from another gentleman. What financial institutions finance such deals, and how much is required for down payment?
Typically for retail, every asset is different, but for retail, we've had the best luck with our personal bank that holds all of our deposits, because when the bank's holding a $1 million plus of your deposits, they tend to give you better interest rates. And then we've also had great luck with credit unions to finance retail deals. And
another question: what is the likelihood that a tenant will sign a lease after a 10, 15, or 20-year lease agreement?
Very likely. Where most of our deals are in the 10 to 15 year sort of cycle, 10 to 20 year cycle. And honestly, what we focus on is good performing assets. So we're focusing on that restaurant, that dollar store that we know performs well and performs well against its peers. So statistically, if something's performing in the top third percentile of all of, for example, of a DQ, if there are 2,000 DQs in the country, I think there's more, I don't know the exact number, and the DQ that you're looking at right now is at the 90th percentile as far as foot traffic and as far as the sales data that you purchased, and they're in a growing area, I mean, the likelihood of them renewing their lease is very high. Now, saying that, there will be some negotiation about, hey, Mr. Landlord or Mrs. Landlord, if I renew my lease, can you do this? And we'll say, okay, we can do this, and we'll adjust your rent this way. So there's always some form of negotiation, but the foundation that you always want to look at is making sure, you know, your purchase decision is based on the longevity of that tenant in that location.
Okay, and Richard's asked a question, what are the fees that you charge your co-investors?
The fees, I mean, the simple answer is we don't charge fees. We do charge something up front just to pay for our staff, and so we charge an acquisition fee. But Greenleaf, myself, we are co-investors in the deal, and so we make money when the deal makes money. So we give investors a preferred return. So the first 6 to 8, 7, 8, 9% of a deal goes straight to the investors, and then after that preferred return, we do some form of split between investors and general partner, and that's how we make our money. So our interests are always aligned. So basically, we make money when the investors make money. If the deal sells for break-even value, we basically operated the deal for, you know, just a little bit of basically a management fee that pays for our accountant and our tax return, and that's it. And the general partner did not make any money at the end of the deal if the investors don't make money at the end of the deal.
Okay, and have a question, follow-up question from Harry. I think you may have answered part of this, Andrew. If Greenleaf syndicates the funds from various investors, what kind of returns have historically been paid to investors? And part 2 of it is, are the investors' funds tied to a certain property or deal, or are they tied to Greenleaf's money pool in general?
We let investors decide what they're going to invest in. And so we do have a few pools of properties, maybe 3 or 4 properties, but typically we will offer one property at a time to investors. And so the investor can say, oh, I really like that property, I'm going to invest some money in, or they're not. We are, like our most recent offering, we have some of the Dollar Generals are very inexpensive. And so we have a portfolio of $3 Generals we're offering, because that essentially $3 Generals might equal a kind of a nice sized restaurant. And so we're offering those together as a package. And so then you're investing in those 3 assets equally. And as far as a track record, you know, I'll cover that. It's just a very good question, because I will say, when you invest with anybody, you know, if you don't invest with Greenleaf and you find another syndicator or somebody else who wants you to give them money with real estate, always confirm their track record, because there are a lot of people in the real estate business who, while they have good intentions, they may or may not know what they're doing, and they may be doing this as a hobby, or they may be doing this as a hustler, but they're not doing it as a business. And so, you know, just quite frankly, we're on our, I think we number our deals, and so right now we're on our 100, and I think we're getting to 130. So we're on 130 deals traded over our lifetime here, and we bought and sold. You can see the number right there, about 750 million of properties over the years. And as far as our retail portfolio has averaged about 20% plus on all of our exits over the past few years. And we actually have that in a nice presentation that we can give anybody who's interested, that shows, actually it's even just interesting as an example of, we bought the asset for this, we sold it for this, and this was the lesson we learned for that. And so we have a little presentation on showing you our performance history on our retail assets. And if anybody's interested in that, we could send that to you also.
Okay, 2 final questions coming on up here, Andrew, because we're getting up on time. Can anyone invest in a Greenleaf syndication outside of their IRA using taxable money?
Yes, you could invest in you can invest in a Greenleaf investment various ways. You can invest with 1031 capital that you might have sold a condo in Fort Lauderdale or something like that, and you want to invest in a Zaxby's. So you can invest via 1031, so your money is actually tax-free, and we help a lot of people do that. You can invest through an IRA, like with Advanta, and we partner with Advanta to manage the back end for you. And then also you can also invest with post-tax cash and just free equity, just money sitting in your checking account. You could write us a check and you could invest that way too. Or honestly, you could invest any way possible through a LLC, through a trust. We have it all. We have about over 400 active investors, and we have investors investing through trusts, family funds, LLCs, personal names, business names. It's all over the board.
Okay, good deal. It looks like the final question comes from Richard. Do you do any case studies that potential investors can attend?
We have videos about 2 to 3 times a month that talk about what we're doing. And we do have lots of videos. We have a Greenleaf YouTube channel, and so there's lots of interesting content there. Hopefully it's not too boring, but we do talk a lot about our deals, and we talk about some of the successes, some of the things going on in the marketplace. And so we have a pretty active YouTube channel that we could also send you the link to. So happy to give you the link to that too. If you just want to email me, and I'll send you a link to our YouTube channel, and you can see if any of the titles or the topics interest you.
Okay, one final question just slid in from Harry. Does Greenleaf allow for reinvestment of the self-directed IRA returns, aka quarterly returns that you talked about?
The way our investments work is we always distribute cash. And so when we distribute cash for the fresh equity investors or the 1031 investors, we're just distributing cash to the investor's bank account wherever they tell us to go. For IRA investors, the IRA free cash then goes back to the IRA account. And so for example, in my IRA account, I have multiple IRA investments. And so what happens then is my IRA accumulates cash from all the distributions. And then at some point when there's a Greenleaf offering that sounds interesting, I'll take that cash from the investment and then invest it in a new deal. We can't necessarily reinvest it in a current deal, but we could reinvest it in a future deal.
Okay, great. And I have one question that came in. It looks like it's for me to answer from Xavier. If you have a Roth, HSA, and education IRA, can we pool those together to invest? In general, Xavier, yes, you can pool them together. There may be a need to keep them in separate accounts, but you could put, in theory, those dollars to work in a particular investment. You can feel free to reach out to me, and more than happy to provide you a little more in-depth explanation once I understand a little bit more about the background of your question. Andrew, anything else you wanted to bring up since we're at the end here?
Nope, Ted, thank you for coming. It looks like almost 30 people joined, and really happy. Thank you for the invitation, and I hope it was useful for your audience.
Judging by the questions, they were engaged. So, and they were pretty substantive questions. So
I get to go home tonight
as well.
I get to go home to my wife and say, Janet, I think they almost thought it was interesting, and I didn't bore anybody. So she'll be very happy about that one.
Absolutely. But I've just got my contact info up here on the screen. If anyone wishes to reach out to me with follow-up questions you'd like me to get to Lisa or Andrew regarding the presentation or getting on their email and contact list, you can certainly let me know. I'll get the information over to them, and then we'll be sending on out a we'll make sure you get their contact info and send it out through the appropriate channels. But with that said, unless there's any more questions, I just make a motion we bring this to a close for today. Thank you, everybody.